And we are live. Hello, everyone. How are you doing today? Welcome to another episode of American Autopsy's podcast, Tox Talk. And today's guest is a very special guest. It's been a long time coming, and I'm so glad that he's here today. Please welcome Caleb Maupin to the program.
Hi.
How are you doing? Yeah, so it's a lot that I wanted to talk to you about, Caleb. But just to begin, just briefly tell the audience, a little bit about yourself, your background, um, just what you rep and things like that.
Sure. Well, I'm a journalist, a political analyst. I'm the leader of the Center for Political Innovation. I'm an advocate of 21st century socialism. I oppose the global system of monopoly capitalism and imperialism. I've written a number of books. I've traveled to a number of different countries. And I really do believe we are in an era of transition. There is a new economy that's emerging in the world, centered around Russia and China and the socialist countries of the world, and that we're entering a new era while Western capitalism is in a state of collapse, and we're seeing just civilizational decay in the Western capitalist countries. So I'm out there trying to present an alternative, optimism in a world of darkness. That's what I'm all about.
All right, yeah, all amazing things, and I guess we could start off with CPI, because that's one of the things that I really got hooked onto your channel about is how you guys kind of leave aside the identity politics things and focus more so on the actual hardships that Americans are facing today. And one of the things that really caught my interest was your 4-point plan. And I never understood all of the internet hate you got when you actually go to CPI's website and you read what you guys are trying to do and push for the country. Like, it's nothing that most quote unquote progressives and leftists shouldn't be disagreeing with, but somehow they find a way to disagree with it. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that for a lot of people, the reason that they object is they don't want to be popular. They don't want average people to come along and support them. They're in this rather to virtue signal, to prove how good they are. They want everyone else to be wrong and themselves to be right. They don't actually want to win people over to a program that could win and improve the country. Rather, they simply want to distinguish themselves. They want, almost like a new shirt to wear or a commodity or something like that. That it's more about their personal identity than it is really about succeeding. Our 4-point plan is, the first item is for a mass infrastructure rebuilding of the country: new high-speed railway, new highways, bridges, new power plants, new schools, new universities, new hospitals. Improve the country, give the country an upgrade. It's falling apart in many places. And hire lots of people to do it, right? Put people to work, the unemployed, the underemployed, put them to work, rebuilding our country. Second thing is for, in order to pay for this, public control of our natural resources. The profits from America's oil and America's coal and America's timber and America's natural gas should go into the public budget so we can pay for things like schools and hospitals and education and highways and things that are good for the country. And right now, our natural resources are the private property of a lot of wealthy people. And instead, they should be considered the birthright of everyone in the country, that the riches and the wealth of America should be used to benefit the country overall. The third point is public ownership of banking. There's a number of things you can point to. I often point to the U.S. Constitution that says that only the federal government can print money. But yet we've privatized that. We've handed that over to a private company called the Federal Reserve Bank. Well, we want to get rid of the Federal Reserve Bank and instead have a national bank that is controlled by the taxpayers that handles the printing of money. In addition to that, credit should be assigned based on what's good for the community at a local level, at a state level, and a federal level. We should have the community in control of the purse strings so that we can say, look, if this neighborhood, we want to make it more prosperous, okay, we give a bunch of people mortgage loans. So some new houses can be built, people can move in. If somebody comes and they says, I want to start a business, and they can show that it would be in the interest of the community, then we loan them the money to do it. But the idea is having the credit in the hands of the community so that it can be strategically done in an overall vision of making the country a better place. And then the fourth item is an economic bill of rights. And that's what Roosevelt called for in his final State of the Union speech. He called for an economic bill of rights, the right to jobs, the right to housing, the right to education. These things should be guaranteed to the American public, right? And we should really be viewing the public as an asset, as an investment. When someone gets education, right now there's all this talk about student debt and how bad it is. The thing is, education is not just a gift, it's an investment. If you are educating the people of your population, the idea is they will get that education and they will go then out into the workforce and do good things, right? We need more engineers in America. We need more scientists in America. We need such people. So providing education, it's not just like a handout, it's investing in the future of the country. Those are our 4 points. And overall, we have a leadership in this country that doesn't really like the American people. They see the American people as an annoying horde that needs to be managed. And they are thinking more about the global capitalist system and how they can make super profits from beating down countries around the world and propping up their open international system. Well, instead, we need a government that serves the people of this country. And that government would improve relations with countries around the world. We could start trading with countries on the basis of win-win cooperation instead of, the predatory activities of big corporations and ultra monopolies. We could do what China's doing with their Belt and Road Initiative. We could join the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. We could join the Eurasian Economic Union. We could become friendly with the Bolivarian alternative of Latin America and with the BRICS countries, and that the USA could become part of this new emerging alternative economy, which believes in economic growth, which puts people ahead of profits, which believes that the economy should be controlled in order to make sure that growth is unlimited. We could become part of that. And this 4-point economic plan, these are things that I think most Americans would agree to. They would want the country to get better in these ways, and they would be very hard to object. But in order to carry them out, we would have to push back the power of a lot of big corporations, a lot of big oil monopolies, a lot of big natural gas companies, a lot of big banks would fight really hard against this, the healthcare corporations and others. And so a plan like this, by going around and mobilizing the public for it, that could lay the basis for moving to a full-on socialist society, right? I mean, these are four demands that put the people of this country into confrontation with the Wall Street warmaker class.
Yes, exactly. And, a lot of the points you talk about is the United States, they like to criticize countries like China, Russia, and all these countries that are, developing countries instead of destroying them. My thing has always been imperialism. And that's one of the things you talk about in your writings, your speeches, your YouTube channel. And I just covered a story on my live the other day because personally, like for like, I would say about the last month or so, I've been dabbling into like a lot of like Pan-African thought. Like I've been, listening to like a lot of Farrakhan because I used to get told by liberals all the time, oh, this guy, everything this guy says is bad. Don't listen to this guy. Everything he says is bad. And I think you mentioned like you met with him or did something with the NOI in your past, I believe.
Well, yeah, I'm frequently quoted in Final Call newspaper.
Yeah.
Nisa Islam is one of their reporters, and she will come to me for analysis. They've featured my commentary a number of times. You can see that on their website. And I actually had the honor of visiting the Islamic Republic of Iran to attend the third New Horizon Conference, which was dedicated to the Black freedom struggle in the United States. And a number of the key leaders of the Nation of Islam from Washington, D.C., from Chicago, from the Caribbean, from other places attended that conference. It was a very exciting conference in Iran dedicated to the Black freedom struggle. Yeah, I mean, the leading staff of the Nation of Islam was there, kind of Farrakhan's inner circle, and I have deep admiration for them. They are anti-imperialists. I do recall also I got to attend the Millions March in Harlem back in 2011, and that was a huge protest in support of Gaddafi that was organized by Minister Farrakhan in Harlem. The anti-war groups, the socialist groups, most of them were not supporting Libya, but the minority that were, we had rallies that'd be maybe 10, 20, 30 people there. The Millions March in Harlem was huge. It was tens of thousands of people, block after block after block, and very well organized. They had a huge like jumbotron with Minister Farrakhan's face on it, and Cynthia McKinney, the congresswoman, was there. Ramsey Clark, who I was working for at the time with the International Action Center, he's the former U.S. Attorney General. He was there. It was a really amazing gathering in support of Gaddafi, and it was quite bold, and it showed that in the Black community there was a lot of admiration for Gaddafi and the achievements he'd carried out on the African continent. So yeah, I have a huge amount of admiration for the Nation of Islam and Minister Farrakhan. I obviously don't agree with everything. I'm for gay marriage. They're opposed to it. You know, I think abortion should be legal. I think that they are opposed to it. They're more socially conservative than I am, but that doesn't matter. They're anti-imperialists. What they want, if you talk to them about economics, it sounds a lot like socialism to me. You know, they want jobs and healthcare and education for the population. And on top of that, I do uphold the position of the Communist International that African Americans in the United States are an oppressed nation. They're a colonized people within U.S. borders. They don't just suffer exploitation like workers, like all workers suffer. They suffer super exploitation on account of the fact that they are part of an oppressed nation, and oppressed nations have the right to self-determination. And so Black nationalism of any variety is something that I am sympathetic towards. As someone who supports people around the world fighting for their independence from Wall Street and imperialism, I also support oppressed nations within the U.S. borders who fight for those things. And, you know, I'm sympathetic. We had at the CPI conference in Chicago, leaders of the African People's Socialist Party that just got, you know, horrendously treated and raided by the FBI. We were honored to have them speak at our conference and to stand in solidarity.
I actually tried to get out to that conference. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it, but I tried to get out there.
Yeah, and it was really great to have them come. You know, I'm sympathetic to all forms of Black nationalism, more or less. And you know, I don't think that as a white person, it's my job to pick and choose which Black nationalists are good, which are bad. You know, that's up to the Black people themselves. And if Black people want to integrate, that's up to them as well. You know, I don't want to force, you know, the issue of separation or integration. That is up to the Black community. But yeah, Black nationalism and support for Black nationalism is a big part of what I think it means to be a socialist or a communist in 21st century America.
Yes. And you know, dabbling into that, I covered a story on my live stream the other day where they like literally just outright admit like the United States has been imperializing Haiti for God knows how many years. I would say it goes back to when Haiti, you know, gained its freedom in the first place. They had to pay the French back for their freedom over all these years. I think not too long ago they just finished paying that debt off to them. But the fact that I didn't know Haiti had as many resources as it did. So I have, you know, friends from Haiti. You know, my dad's girlfriend is from Haiti. Like I know a lot of people from Haiti, and that's like I don't even think they would personally know that. And it's like when I started reading about like the oil reserves there, they're like predicting that it could be like as much as Venezuela or more, like just all the vast untapped resources. And it's like when you think about all of the corporations that's been in Haiti, you know, the strongmen they've installed over the years, it's very much akin to, you know, to what we talk about with capitalism and imperialism, specifically how it seeks to dominate countries and suppress them and push them into poverty. So when I hear like people talk about countries like Russia and China saying, oh, they're imperialist countries, I'm like, well, you don't know the definition of the word, because everywhere I look, you know, Russia and China is going around developing countries. You know, Putin just he did a thing for Castro, I think today. I believe he did a memoriam for him. China's out here and, you know, invest in all types of things in Africa, building ports. And what is the U.S. doing in its own backyard? You know, it's funding drug cartels that it has been for years in Mexico. It's trying to overthrow country after country in Latin America. It's like when these are countries that you could be, you know, developing with, you may not agree with how they decide to develop, but at the end of the day, if capitalism was what it was, in my view, and like how capitalists try to describe it, like you guys shouldn't be afraid of competition. Your whole thing is, oh, we're pro competition. We think competition breeds the best. Well, clearly you don't, because you do anything in your power to rig, you know, quote unquote opponents. But these people don't view themselves as necessarily opponents to the United States until they, you know, come along and do the nefarious stuff they do. So, you know, the development of countries, you know, around the world, and especially, you know, me personally thinking about, you know, African and Black countries and things like that. When I hear you speak of that, like, honestly, I don't hear progressives saying that. And that's kind of been pushing me more into, more of a black, nationalist mindset, because, you got progressives like TYT and things like that that will call out Republicans for being racist. But now you see Anna Kasparian and Cenk Uygur running pieces about why we need more of a police state. It's insane. It's utter insanity. Like, if you could just give your thoughts on that just and give your thoughts on it.
Well, sure. Well, Joe Biden's platform that he laid out when he announced he was running for president, America Must Lead Again, it didn't call for development of the African continent. It called for stopping China from building coal power plants in Africa because it was bad for the environment. And actually, you can see the UN, the World Bank, they have stopped many of the great infrastructure programs that China has tried to build on the African continent. They've gotten in the way. And at the same time, if you look at the role that Russia and China are playing in Africa with the Eurasian Economic Union, with the Belt and Road Initiative, it's a very good one. When I was in Russia for the World Conference of Parliamentarians, there were a number of leaders of African countries who talked about how Russia's state-run energy corporations and Russia's state-run mining corporations have partnerships with the African countries, and they help the African countries develop their own industries and resources. That's the opposite of imperialism. Imperialism is when, the USA goes to Haiti and puts all the domestic farmers out of business. So they have to import their food from the United States, right? But when Russia, is trading with African countries, they tend to do the opposite, help them build up their own industries, help them have control of their own economy. It's kind of a win-win partnership. I noticed, when we were having demonstrations in New York City in support of Russia, in Manhattan, a lot of the folks who were giving us thumbs up and such were people from African countries, people from Africa, because, in Africa, there is a lot of support for Russia. And at the UN recently, the USA has been putting on these like symbolic condemnation votes against Russia. The countries that abstain and just refuse to vote and refuse to go along with the United States in condemning Russia tend to be African countries, largely. When it comes to the African continent, the leadership of Angola and the MPLA, they come out of a revolution. And, I think that they've achieved quite a bit. They were subjected, they got their independence in 1975, but from 1975 until 2002, they were subjected to a civil war. The USA was arming this terrorist group called UNITA, and so they had years of just civil war. But in 2002, they finally established peace. And after that, for the next 10 years, they had the highest rate of economic growth in the world. I mean, they were just rapidly raising people out of poverty. I mean, the capital of Angola, it rapidly, built up into a very powerful city. And Isabel dos Santos, who is the richest woman in Africa, she's the daughter of the revolutionaries who laid the basis for the MPLA government. She did quite a bit to basically force the companies that were trading in Angola to invest in the population there, to, buy their supplies domestically. She refused to privatize the natural gas. Now, I know she was forced out, and there is some divisions now within the MPLA. But overall, the ruling party of Angola is a revolutionary party. It's sympathetic to Russia and China. And I do continue to have optimism about Angola. I know they are very dependent on oil, but they would like to have more industries than that. And it is still a very poor country. Also, when I've been in Russia at international conferences, I often will meet with delegations from Zimbabwe. The ZANU PF, the Zimbabwe African National Union Patriotic Front. That is a Marxist-Leninist revolutionary party that leads Zimbabwe. They have redistributed the land from the white farmers to the African people. And when I was in Russia in 2017 and I met with the communists from Zimbabwe, one of the things that they talked about is, one of the biggest waterfalls, I think the biggest waterfall in the world, is called Victoria Falls, and it's located in Zimbabwe. And it's a huge, huge waterfall. But because of the imperialists basically want to cut off and isolate Zimbabwe, there's been no way for tourists to get there. So China worked with the government of Zimbabwe to actually build a beautiful hotel facing that waterfall, to build roads so that tourists could get to it. And now, thanks to the help of China, Zimbabwe is welcoming in a lot of tourists to come and see the Victoria Falls, which is a great step forward. And it's brought a lot of money into Zimbabwe. And I think that's a good thing as well. I know Zimbabwe now uses the Chinese currency, from what I understand, as their official currency. And Robert Mugabe, he's now retired, but but he was the leader for many years. Robert Mugabe's personal bodyguards are from North Korea. He actually has North Korean bodyguards who protect him, which I think is kind of neat as well. And that their relationship with Russia and China and with the anti-imperialist countries of the world like North Korea and Cuba is certainly well established. And so there are good forces on the African continent. There are many good forces within the African National Congress. There's many good forces in the economic freedom fighters of South Africa. It's often complicated because in a lot of these parties, especially in Southern Africa, that came to power in anti-colonial, anti-imperialist struggles that were supported by the Soviet Union, since the fall of the Soviet Union, there's been a divide. And, like the ruling party, for example, of Namibia, SWAPO, right? The Southwest African People's Organization. There is a pro-Western neoliberal wing of that party, but there's also a Marxist-Leninist and revolutionary and anti-imperialist wing of that party as well. And that's one thing that I learned, because you don't hear about this. But when I first started going to international communist gatherings, I had no idea that the ruling party of Namibia was a communist party, that the ruling party of Angola was a communist party, that the African National Congress, which is the biggest political party in South Africa, the Communist Party is one of the biggest factions within it. I had no idea, right? This is kind of hidden from us. When we think about communism, we think of just Cuba and North Korea, but no, the communist movement is very big and vast. And especially in Africa and South America, it has a lot of influence. There are many parts of the world where communists have seats in parliament, where communists are leading trade unions that have millions of people in them. You talk about countries like, India, for example, Kerala, that's a whole province that is run by the communists. It's run by the Communist Party of India Marxists. So there's many parts of the developing world where communists are very influential and very important. And the communism that they push has nothing to do with the Western synthetic left. It is not this destructive, pessimistic, hopeless, message that we get all over the internet. It's instead a message about optimism. They want to start building their countries up. They study Marx, they study Lenin, they study historical and dialectical materialism, and they are about building and constructing. That's what they're about. And it's very different than the kind of aesthetic that Western leftists get into. And that's the communism that I believe in, right? That's the communist movement that I stand for. The Cuban president was just today in Russia meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The communists of Vietnam have raised millions of people out of poverty with their socialist-oriented market economy. The Chinese Communist Party has had many achievements. That is the communist movement to which I am sympathetic and loyal. I'm not sympathetic and loyal to the synthetic left, to this destructive entity that really doesn't want a better world. It just wants chaos and destruction. I am for the city building tendency, which largely includes the communist parties of the world.
Yeah, and it's almost like, as I started to come more into communism and Marxism and things like that and learning more about it, I'm still learning a lot about it, reading up on it and things like that. But I noticed that stark difference. Like, I was a person that was always interested in like science, building stuff, how do they go about building bridges, or, what type of truck do they use to transport X, Y, and Z product, whatever it is, like, because those are like the nitty gritty things that, gets a society moving. And it seems like that's a lot what Marx is really focused on, is like you say, being city builders. And like, that has always been like, something I've been into, and especially being a Star Trek fan as well. I'm like, I want a society that looks like Star Trek in the future, not a society that looks like Blade Runner. Like, and I feel like the synthetic left and a lot of these like leftists, especially in the West, like they will be like okay with Blade Runner kind of, because people are allowed to be their identity or whatever, stuff they believe in. But it's like, that's not a reality that most actual people want to live in. Like, I grew up in more of like a suburban area, and my grandfather was, a warehouse property manager. So I've seen, that aspect. And then, what I do, I'm a forklift driver myself. I've been driving forklifts pretty much most of my, working life. I'm only 26 years old, but most of my working life, I've been a forklift driver. I worked in warehousing, I've worked in construction environments, but I've also been in like these, liberal colleges, and I've seen both sides. And it's like a stark difference. Like, when I hear people talk about like, people they call right wingers on the left, I'm like, are you calling this guy a right winger just because he says some stuff you may not like? Like, God forbid you walk on a construction site or something like that. It's like, it's a lot of like, people, they don't understand like real people. It's all in like theory and things like that, where theory is good. I'm reading it myself. I used to be more of a fast reader, but that's besides the point. But that stuff is good, but if you're not going to attribute it to actual people, then what's the point of it? It's useless at that point.
Yeah, well, the
You're
object
just
is
like
to win.
screaming into the wind to people that agree with you.
Right. The object is to actually win, to change the world. And that, I keep coming back to this point that was made recently by a friend of mine, Fox of the Space Commune podcast. But, pessimism is a great place to hide. If you don't think there's any hope, if there's nothing we can do, then you can just sit back and complain about things and make fun of people and stuff like that. But if you actually think we could win, then suddenly you have an obligation to do something. Suddenly you have an obligation to take action. And that's something people are very, very afraid of. It puts a personal kind of responsibility on them. Like, we could actually win. So what I do could actually make a difference. So I better try to do the best I can. And that scares people. And I see a lot of that. And at the end of the day, I think that eventually, the forces that do want a better America will prevail. They will see that aligning with Russia and China and aligning with the countries of the world that have broken out of imperialism, that they will ultimately, be successful. It'll probably be long and difficult, but I think that there will be a transition of the United States towards socialism. But we need to talk about it in a realistic way, and not in some kind of violent fantasy way. And I think that's important. And that, you talk about reading theory. If you're actually involved in building a revolutionary organization, if you're part of a community of people that are dedicated to struggling, all the books, they strike you completely differently. You understand them in a completely different way. If you read Marx in a college philosophy class, it seems pretty weird, and a lot of people don't really like it. But if you read Marx in the context of building a revolutionary organization and understanding it, it suddenly makes much more sense to you. Same with Lenin, the same with the work of Che Guevara and Thomas Sankara and others. It's a completely different thing, that theory, when it is divorced from practice, is really just kind of an abstract thing. If you're just, doing stuff in your head, anything's possible. But when you're actually doing real work on the ground, suddenly at that point, you have to apply this in the real world. You have to see what works, see what doesn't work. And what works in the real world and what sounds neat on the internet often don't match up.
Mhm. Exactly. Like a lot of the environmentalist stuff that you brought up before, like on paper, these things sound good, but when you actually get into the nitty gritty of them, it's just not feasible. When you look at like things like wind energy and solar, like those are good concepts. When you look at the energy consumption that a country like the United States has, for example, like it's just not feasible for our consumption. That's why I'm an advocate of nuclear. I think nuclear is the way to go. Like, and look at what China's doing with their fusion reactor. Like that's like something like I've been into that because of Iron Man and things like that. So his Iron Man wears the arc reactor. So I started looking up, things like what's similar to that, because that's cool. And I was like young, like this is back in like 2008. But I started reading into things like fusion, and like just back then, like scientists were saying, oh, but it's something that's impossible. It would literally solve the energy crisis, but it's impossible. It's not. And here you have China, a socialist country that's literally on the verge. That's on the verge of it. And my thing is like, the US isn't, a socialist economy, but imagine if the United States will put its bullshit aside, will put all of its, machinations of world domination aside, and actually collaborate with these countries and seeing where it will go. Like if we spent as much money as we spent on bombs on trying to crack that code, like yeah, it may take a while to do it, but it'll be shorter when you're working with somebody instead of constantly trying to work against countries like China and Russia and all of these countries that are making breakthroughs in science. I was watching I think it's Richard Medhurst, if I'm not mistaken.
Sure.
And one of the things he talks about all the time is sorry. It's Iran. They're like their scientific development. Like I've always known, like they have well-regarded scientists there, but not at the level, that I learned about. And like they're a very modernized society, whereas the United States would have you believe they're just like a desert. They only have like a couple good cities and things like. No, they're very much an advanced civilization there as well.
Sure. I actually, when I was a reporter with Press TV, the news agency from Iran, I went to a fusion energy research lab in New Jersey, and I got to interview Dr. Eric Lerner, who is a very well-respected physicist, and he wrote the book "The Big Bang Never Happened." He's one of the big critics of the new physics, but he has a fusion energy research facility, this huge facility in New Jersey, and they collaborated with labs in Iran, and it was, originally when the USA started putting sanctions on Iran, the federal government stepped in and said, you can't collaborate and do fusion energy research with Iran. And they had to take it to court, and they eventually were able to continue doing research. But Iran puts a huge amount of their money into fusion energy resources and fusion energy research, because it's very important. I mean, fossil fuels is not going to last forever. It's not the solution, right? We can get to a higher fuel source. And what I find disturbing is there's all this talk about climate change and global warming. Why are these forces not excited about fusion energy, right? Why is their answer always to go to a lower form of energy, windmills, solar panels? It's like, yeah,
where all the capitalists have their money invested.
yeah. It's never to get to a higher mode. It's, well, we all have to be poorer. And it's like, we know that solar panels and windmills, they don't create the same amount of energy. Like, if we were to switch to that, we would have to drastically reduce the amount of energy we consume. And if you want to have a stronger economy, you need to, consume more energy. I mean, it's a degrowth agenda. They want the world to get poorer and stay poorer. They want to drive down the population so that they can stay on top and they can be rich. And that's what it's really about. And the pessimism that's flowing through all of our society is their pessimism, because the future is beyond them. And they realize that humanity and human progress is going to keep speeding ahead. But they're not going to stay at the top of the pyramid for much longer. Those wealthy, entrenched families that have dominated Western capitalism for the past 200 years, they're going to get pushed aside, and the human race is going to keep going. And they're afraid of that. So their only answer is to try and move backward.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the ways it seems like they're doing that, I guess we go ahead and move into the Ukraine conflict that's going on, is literally deindustrializing Europe. That's actually one of the things that Garland Nixon was talking about. In my personal opinion, I think that's why they really kicked him off of Twitter. But he introduced this theory that I found fascinating, that what if the whole time, this whole Russia-Ukraine thing was about basically stealing Europe's industry as a means to compete with China, which is like, that was something I never really thought about, because of how hawkish they've been towards Ukraine since 2014. But I guess, a capitalist sees opportunity in any scenario they can find, and when one door closes, another opens. But this whole it seems like Russia, like seeing how Putin and his his people have been navigating this whole thing. It's been very interesting to watch, because I think I think they recognized that from the beginning, what they were trying to do to Europe. And it's almost like every move they make, it's almost like, are you sure you want to do this, Europe? Are you positive you want to listen to Uncle Sam leading you to oblivion? Okay, if you want to keep going that way. And it seems like that's been the trajectory of this conflict. And seeing this happen in real time, all the protests going on in Europe right now that the media is not covering at all. You scroll through on Twitter and you see it everywhere, but surprisingly the mainstream media doesn't see it. But just go into that a little bit, as well, because I kind of see a little bit of that coming here to the States. But Jimmy Dore says this all the time. He sees the United States going in the direction of Brazil, basically. So if you could just go into that a little bit as well.
Sure. Well, I think that the issue at hand is that, the European countries buy a lot of oil and natural gas from Russia. And every ounce of oil and every ounce of natural gas that they buy from Russia is oil they didn't buy from ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, and Chevron. And so there is a feeling that this crisis in Ukraine is a great opportunity to force Russia off the market, to force these countries in Europe to purchase their oil and gas from American companies. And so that's really the issue. Russia was deeply, deeply impoverished and just really suffering after the fall of the Soviet Union. The fall of the Soviet Union devastated their economy. The way Putin fixed their economy was by centering it around government-controlled oil and gas. Russia sells their oil and gas on the international markets. The revenue gets back into the Russian economy. They use it to subsidize their industries, and that's how the Russian economy functions at this point. And so Russia is an energy superpower. I mean, they're selling oil and gas all over the world, and that is something that Wall Street can't stand because they don't want any competition. And this war has driven the oil prices up. I mean, the gas prices have gone up through the roof, and that has been a huge boost to the profits of the big oil companies. In addition, it's enabled them to push Russia out of the market in certain areas. Now, certain countries are just not going along with it. India is going to keep buying Russian gas. China is going to keep buying it. Certain countries are continuing to buy Russia's oil and gas.
I know Pakistan was as well. Wow.
Yeah. A number of countries are just not willing to go along with the United States on that. But some countries have, and this has enabled them to drive the price up by creating false scarcity, supply and demand. The less of it that's out there, the more the prices go up. And on top of that, it's enabled them to then, conquer and push Russia out of certain markets. I mean, this is a power grab by the big oil companies. And big oil, I mean, that really is Wall Street. I mean, if you look at Wall Street, you've got HSBC Bank. That's British Petroleum, basically. That's the Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation. It's a bank that was set up for laundering drug money by the British Empire, basically. And it was it was used for laundering money into China before China's revolution. And now it's one of the major banks on Wall Street, heavily tied in with BP. Chase Bank, that's another major bank. That's basically ExxonMobil. That's the Rockefellers. It's also the estate of the Morgans, JP Morgan. It's JP Morgan Chase. So you look at that. I mean, Wall Street is oil street. And oil is the commodity at the center of the economy. I mean, every gas, every car, every airplane, every plastic item, that's petroleum in there. And that's a profit for them. And so they sit at the center of the economy. Very much the CIA and the intelligence agencies, a lot of their work is done by corporations that are funded by these same entities. The Rockefeller family, it's Standard Oil, which the modern incarnation of is ExxonMobil, the Rockefeller think tanks. That's where a lot of the work that's done by the Council on Foreign Relations and other entities that craft U.S. foreign policy, it's being carried out, directly funded by the oil companies and by the estates of oil monopolies and oil dynasties. And the intelligence apparatus and big oil seem to walk hand in hand. And Silicon Valley and the tech giants, the tech monopolies, are largely their creation. The free market didn't create the computer revolution. During the 1970s, the U.S. intelligence community figured out that the U.S. had more resources to invest in computers. So it was loans from the NSA, loans arranged by the CIA, loans arranged by different intelligence agencies that enabled, Apple and IBM and eventually Microsoft and eventually Google and Amazon and these corporations to start up. They were all basically brought into existence by the intelligence community. And this is not a secret. You can Google this. I mean, it's kind of acknowledged that the intelligence agencies decided they were going to, make sure that the USA was leading in terms of computers. And it was a strategic decision. And Silicon Valley, there's a reason you talk about Silicon Valley, you're talking about California, right? And that's a hub of the American intelligence agencies. I often talk about Marilyn Ferguson and her book, The Aquarian Conspiracy. And this was Al Gore's spiritual advisor. She was a spiritual advisor to many prominent Democrats. Al Gore, he famously said, "We invented the internet," and that the Stanford University Research Institute is where a lot of the CIA's research into very bizarre things like mind control and brainwashing and all that was going on, and that Silicon Valley, which gave birth to social media, which gave birth to the modern computer revolution. I mean, that is very much a creation of the intelligence apparatus. And that kind of constitutes what I think is the main kind of danger in U.S. politics now. The big oil companies, the Silicon Valley corporations, and the intelligence apparatus. They're kind of the triangle of evil that we're seeing, right? And they do have a degrowth agenda. They want to set up a global financial empire. They do want to drive down living standards. They do think there are too many people in the world. They do want to reduce the human population. They do believe in some very strange apocalyptic beliefs. They're also, there's a lot of belief in eugenics and the belief that some people are naturally superior to others and those kind of things. And that's what they're pushing. Whereas there are a lot of just lower level millionaires and billionaires who just want to make money. They're not caught up in this agenda, this kind of strategic agenda by one axis of the power structure. They just want to make money, and that's the fight. I think Trump is in with a lot of these capitalists who just want to make money. And Trump, was a bad president in a lot of ways, but he was kind of against this power apparatus. But there is this triangle of evil within the U.S. power structure that has figured out, with the internet and with their control of the means of information, they've figured out very, very effectively how to push forward their own agenda. And they have an agenda that's much more managerial. They want to make a more tightly controlled society to stabilize, to degrow, and to try and maintain the present order. And there is a fight among our ruling class about that. Do we have, just deregulated capitalism so the rich and powerful can make as much profits as they want? Or do we have a tightly controlled system to make sure that the world stays as it is, and that there's not some kind of big upheaval? And I think that that's the division right now among the elite. And so we're seeing that play out. And that's why, Trump, Elon Musk is now in charge of Twitter, and Trump has now been allowed back on Twitter, but he's not tweeting. And that there is this, there's like a power struggle going on. Now, that doesn't mean that one side is good and the other side is evil. Like, there's evil on all sides here, right? And that as Marxists, we ultimately want something completely different. We're with the oppressed countries, we're with the working class. But it's important to pay attention to these divisions and notice that with these divisions, there could be an opening for a working class agenda, an agenda of construction and city building to begin to assert itself. And I really like Tulsi Gabbard. I know that there are controversial things that she's done over the years and such, but I like her because I see her as representing a wing of the Pentagon that doesn't seem excited about these regime change wars. And I think about Michael Flynn, who was in the Trump administration, who got fired for, God forbid, talking to a Russian. I guess he lied about it then. He lied about it to Mike Pence, and so that was ultimately why he got fired. But he was somebody who just wanted to fight al-Qaeda. And, he didn't agree with the USA basically acting as al-Qaeda's air force in Syria. And he recognized from his time in the Pentagon that Russia was very helpful in fighting al-Qaeda and these extremist elements. And so he said, why are we fighting with Russia? He was a Pentagon guy who was open to working more closely with Russia. And Tulsi Gabbard also, she comes out of the Pentagon and all of that, but she seems to, want to be less involved in regime change operations. And she's recently quit the Democratic Party. So there are reasons to be hopeful within the power structure. Not everything's not perfect, and we shouldn't expect things to be perfect. But if we just sit back and condemn it all, right? That's easy, but then we're not changing anything. We're not having any influence. We need to pay attention to the divisions in the ruling class and see openings for the people. And that's something that I've committed myself to doing. I take this seriously. I've been taught that if you're a Marxist and you give Marxist analysis, right? You explain how the world is. You then explain why the world is the way it is. And then you explain how we can intervene and what we can do to get the world toward a better one and toward socialism, right? That's your responsibility. You don't just describe things as they are, but you explain why, and then you explain what we can do, right? And that if you're a Marxist and you're doing that, you have an obligation to do those three things. And I don't see a lot of internet Marxists doing those three things. I see a lot of internet Marxists screaming and yelling at the world, condemning people, calling people racist, sexist, and homophobic. But the point is, why is the world the way it is, and what can we do about it?
Yeah, and that's something that I think you talked about it on your stream the other night. When it came to making alliances with people, and as I said earlier, I've been moving more towards like Pan-Africanism, even like a lot of what the ADOS movement is saying, the Friedman movements, Black people who are more on a conservative spectrum. And, I can't lie, like I have been like more focused on, Black issues lately. My father is, part of that. He's like a Friedman's movement type of guy. He wants to put Black issues first. And that's kind of a mindset I have been adopting myself, because I look around and I see like, I'm blessed to have, had a family that, got me out of the hood, basically, moved us out of that atmosphere, got us into a suburban area. But I look back and, I see, my family members who still have to deal with a lot of the pressures, of living there. I see, just online, we live in an online world where now you can see, people can actually document their struggles and things like that. And, all these movements that, Black people, that Black Americans specifically have attached themselves to, whether it's, the communist movement, the socialist movement, all these different types of movements. We tried the Democrats, Republicans, Black people have tried everything. It just seems like, our communities aren't getting any better. So that's where, I hear your message and I 100% agree with you. And I'm with that type of development, but also, as you said at the top, I'm not a person that advocates for like, a segregationist position, but, like I've been trying to distinguish whether it's, playing identity politics. If you're actually looking at, so I'm not saying these things, strictly, I'm not like some liberal on, TV screaming about, oh, Black Lives Matter, and they're not actually focusing on like the working class Black people. We're talking about, liberal Black people that, that are in that space. But like, I see those, real things that Black people aren't attaining, like I said on the stream last night or 2 nights ago, two things that I feel Black Americans don't have is economic that freedom of being existing in the economy, and cultural sovereignty. Specifically, I feel like Black Americans have been locked out of that. So while I agree with people, like Tulsi Gabbard, like Michael Flynn, somebody I agree less than, but when I heard about, this is a guy like the FBI basically like entrapped him, like being Black, you've heard stories about don't talk to cops, don't talk to people that look like FBI. Hearing that story, how they basically entrapped this guy into catching him in a lot, like they pulled up on him when he was like poolside, he was drinking all day or something like that. I think Gray Zone talked about this at one point, and they asked him all of these like weird questions like the night before. The guy was probably drinking that night too, like, oh, what are you doing here, XY, basically trying to entrap him. It's literally in their notes that they went in there trying to entrap him. I'm like, oh, that's that, I know what that is. I know what that looks like. That's his setup. That's how they've caught up a lot of people like that. So and I guess the question I'm trying to ask is where do you see like black Americans specifically fitting into this agenda? Because that's one of the questions like I ask all the time when I'm talking to people, because when I hear a lot of people talk, I say this all the time. If Trump was talking about, Black issues, if he was talking about policing issues, if he was talking about all these issues that the Black community is facing, I would probably vote for the guy. I'm not going to lie. And it's because, again, none of like the Democratic Party basically say, yeah, fuck off. We're not doing anything for you guys, nothing. So, what do you see as a path, I know you're not trying to talk at Black people or anything like that, but what do you see the path for Black Americans in the state that the United States is in, as well, with everybody else, but their specific path forward?
Well, I think I would like to answer that by pointing out, and something that I'm sure you're aware of, but a lot of people are not aware of, is the fact that there is this very corporate, very made for TV Black Lives Matter movement that was created to supplant the indigenous leadership, the Pan-Africanist leadership of the Black community. And that was very apparent to me. In 2014, I went to Ferguson, Missouri, and I covered the uprising that was going on there. And those folks were Black nationalists. They were out there. They were sympathy for Iran, sympathy for revolutionary struggles around the world, the new Black Panther Party, the Nation of Islam, other groups were there. And it was very much a Black nationalist kind of feeling on the streets of Ferguson, Missouri, against the police department that was just terrorizing the community there. The details were awful. It was just, you could barely drive down the road at night without getting some kind of ticket. It was just awful what the community there had been subjected to, and the police brutality. And then finally, what happened, with Michael Brown made everything explode the way it did. And then it was after that suddenly you had this wider Black Lives Matter thing that wasn't Pan-Africanist and wasn't rooted in the tradition of Black nationalism, but was much more made for TV. And it was much more about check your privilege and kind of just stoking resentment. And a great example, there's a friend of mine who's a reporter, and she went to a college in Missouri. And it was revealed that this college in Missouri, like some of the founders of the college had been slave owners. And so the Black students at the college said, that they felt that Black students should be able to go there for free because some of the money that had laid the basis for the college had come from slavery. Well, there's certainly something to be said for that. But she asked them, she said, in a lot of countries, in almost every other country in the Western world, college is free for everybody. Don't you think it should be free for everybody? And the response of these students was, well, no, it shouldn't. White people should have to pay for it, but it should be free for black people. And that, that was not, the leaders of the Nation of Islam wouldn't have said that. You know what I mean? The Black Panthers wouldn't have said that. But that's a result of the kind of privilege internet politics where everything, it's not about overcoming capitalism. It's about kind of, unloading your resentment on those who have more than you or have a better position in life. And that this is kind of, this is, the Twitter identity politics that you have expressed frustration with. That's very different than black nationalism. That's very different than Marcus Garvey. That's very different than Minister Farrakhan. That's very different than Fred Hampton and the Black Panthers. It's a different kind of thing. And that there is a big effort, I would argue, on the part of the ruling class that they want to whipsaw the population. There's an old device before the chainsaw was invented. They had a whipsaw. And it was a saw that it took two guys to saw it. And when one guy was pushing, the other guy was pulling. And when the other guy was pulling, the other guy was pushing, right? And that's what they want to do. They want to tell, white, suburban, rural, and southern people, the only way you can gain is at the expense of urban black people. And they want to tell urban black people, the only way you can gain is at the expense of those red state Trumpers. And it's about inciting sections of the population against each other and getting them to believe the only way that they can gain is at each other's expense. But when it really gets down to it, that the economic conditions that Black America has faced for a really, really long time have in the last several decades started to really affect a lot of white neighborhoods as well. And I've seen this transformation in my own life. I grew up in a small town in Ohio. And, when I was a kid, we didn't know anybody who'd been to prison. It was a working class town or whatever. I go back to my hometown, opioids. Everybody knows somebody who's in jail for opioids. Heroin gangs and it's
very
pretty
much
intense.
the new age crack epidemic, honestly.
Yeah. And obviously, the response of a lot of these Republican politicians is very hypocritical. These were the people who were saying lock them up in the 80s when it was the crack epidemic in the black community. And now that it's affecting the white community, they're calling for compassion, et cetera. So that's obviously a hypocrisy that should be pointed out. But at the end of the day, this also shows that now, and it's manifested now, opposition to the war on drugs is almost universal. No matter where you go in this country, white, black, Arab, Asian, Latino, low-income neighborhoods, people don't want the war on drugs. People, and that there's now solidarity, right? Because every community has been affected. People who would have said, oh, that's just a bunch of black people that are using drugs are now saying, well, no, actually, this affects my community. And now they're starting to realize that, oh, maybe we should have been more sympathetic when this was affecting another community. And this is, instead of seeing this as an opportunity to call people out, this is an opportunity where now, as a country, marijuana is being legalized in many places. And we're recognizing that locking people up for using drugs is not a good policy. And that the police state issue, for example, the black community has been talking about police brutality and dealing with horrendous acts of police brutality for decades. Well, now we're starting to see many examples of, as white communities get more impoverished and as they get more unstable, there is an increasing amount of police state repression in white communities. So rather than simply pointing out that the black community has dealt with this for a lot longer, which they have, now is the opportunity for white and black to recognize, hey, the police state is a threat to all of us. And I've gotten a lot of flack because, I marched and protested against police murders, et cetera. But when the Trump supporting woman, when she was killed in the Capitol, I opposed that, and I don't agree with her. She doesn't agree with probably a single thing I've ever said. She hated communism and all of that, but she didn't deserve to die for trespassing. She was trespassing in the Capitol. Well, we don't have the death penalty for that. And on top of that, the police in the building, they were not the judge and jury. She should have been arrested for that, given a trial, and they just killed this woman. And I said, the whole issue here is that police don't have the right to summarily execute people, right? And that I guess what happened was that some people had broken a glass window, and then she had gone to try and crawl through the window, and they shot her and they killed her. People have seen the tape of it. Well, police don't have the right to act that way.
Max Blumenthal said he almost witnessed it, or he saw them pulling her body out of the Capitol
Yeah,
building or something like that. So
right. And I don't have to agree with her politically to say that they didn't have to respond that way. And, I mean, there's many stories from that January 6th incident of like, people with Blue Lives Matter flags, like, fighting with the Capitol Police. Right. And that there is a feeling among low income white workers that the police state is out of control, that our freedoms are being taken away. And I think that's an opportunity for solidarity. And that's an opportunity to build bridges. But the ruling class would like to turn it into an opportunity to divide and further incite people against each other. And that's not the correct approach. That's simply not the correct approach. But that's the approach that the ruling class would like to take. I have always pointed out, the Marxist tradition that I come from always pointed out that one of the biggest lies that the ruling class has told white Americans is that somehow slavery benefited them, right? And that, they've made a whole lot of propaganda movies from Hollywood to try and convince white people that when slavery, back in the days of slavery, all white people were, wealthy. They were, Miss Scarlet, I do declare, and the reality was that the workers of the South that were white, they had the problem of competing with people who worked for free because they were enslaved. And their wages and living conditions were much worse. And the overturning of slavery is what opened the door of public education to low-income white workers in places like South Carolina and places like Georgia. And that the overturning of slavery was very good for white workers in the South. It was very bad for a small minority of rich white people who owned the land. But that narrative has been obscured. The ruling class has tried very, very hard to convince low-income white workers, especially in the South, that somehow the Confederacy was good for them. And that's why you see white workers, trying to defend the Confederate monuments, because they have been lied to and convinced that somehow the Confederacy was good for them, which it was not. It was awful. The Confederacy was an awful thing, especially for the people who were enslaved and were dying. And I mean, it was horrendous, but it was also a bad thing for the majority, the overwhelming majority of the white working class of the South. And that the gains of black people in America have been gains for the entire working class. When black people have won their rights, historically, it's been good for all workers. And that has been obscured. The identity politics narrative obscures that. It makes it sound like, white workers gain at the expense of black workers, and vice versa. And that is simply not the truth historically. Many examples of this. The struggle to build industrial unions in this country. The reason that the capitalists were able to prevent, the auto workers from having a union, the steel workers from having a union, the dock workers of San Francisco from having a union, was because the workers, the steel workers, the dock workers, they tended to be racist and they tended to be whites only. But when the Communist Party came along and said, well, no, we're going to get rid of this racism in our unions. And in fact, one of the demands of our strike will be that black people be able to work in the plants or be able to work on the docks. And when the black community, their demands were brought in to the struggles of labor unions, that's when the unions were victorious. That's when the San Francisco dock workers won their union in 1934. That's when the Flint auto workers had their victorious sit-down strike in 1937. It's when they aligned with the black people that suddenly we got the industrial union. So there's been a huge effort to obscure that. And just as the racist narrative would like to convince white workers that black people's gains are at their expense, that it's in their interest to beat back black people, the identity politics narrative wants to say basically the same thing and agree with this, but say somehow that, well, they should just feel guilty about it. And that just contradicts the history. It just contradicts the history, because by oppressing black people and super exploiting the oppressed, colonized black people of America, the whole working class of the United States has been oppressed. Marx wrote about this with Ireland. Marx wrote about the fact that the British working class, the way the British capitalists were able to exploit them, was by super exploiting the Irish people, who were a colonized people. And so it was in the interest of the British working class to stand in solidarity with the Irish people and their struggle for national liberation. And the more brutal the British capitalists were to the Irish people, the more brutal and the more they could get away with being brutal to their own workers at home. And that the interests of colonized people around the world and domestically who were struggling for their national liberation, and the interests of the domestic working class align. We have the same enemy, which is the capitalists, which is the ruling class, those who own the banks, factories, and industries. And this is the Marxist tradition. And this is what you will read in the work of W.E.B. Du Bois, his very important book, Black Reconstruction. It goes into great detail about this history. And you will find, this put forward in other, great Marxist African-American writers. They put forward this understanding. And this is what the identity politics narrative works very hard to obscure. It doesn't want people to think of it in these terms, right? They want to think of it in terms of privilege, and some people, and they're obscuring the reality that the problem is capitalism, and that racism is a tool of the capitalist bosses to oppress all workers. It's to oppress all workers, but to target, and most explicitly target the oppressed. But it's a mechanism for keeping their brutal system intact. And that's why it is in the interest of all workers to oppose racism and to put forward the agenda of the entire working class. These are the politics that once made class struggle in the United States very strong. These are the politics of Fred Hampton. These are the politics of the Black Panthers. These are the politics of many great revolutionaries. And there's a huge effort to obscure that and instead to whipsaw the population. So that's what I'll say about that.
And to jump off that real quick, it's a topic we had on here, so I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit to tie it into this, because what you said there ties into it perfectly. I don't know if you're a person who's dabbled into hip hop a little bit or anything, but especially as of late, I would say around the NWA era, when gangster rap started coming into hip hop more and everything, you started to get a lot of like capitalist ideals in hip hop, and then nowadays hip hop is just all about how much money you have, how much jewelry you have. It's not about knowledge and feeding you. There's very few rappers. There's a couple out there like J. Cole, Kendrick Lamar, a couple of them out there that talks about things outside of that. But for the most part, all of them talk about the same stuff. But then you have artists like Jay-Z that started his career out talking about things like that. But now the Black community kind of views Jay-Z in like this very like wise, stoic manner. But I'm pointing at this guy like, this guy's a fucking capitalist. This guy's a Black capitalist. He's not for any, like, I literally had a friend like defending him because there was like a big flare up recently, because he said, oh, calling me a capitalist is akin to calling me the N-word or something like that. Like, it's basically like racist white people trying to turn Black people, some dumb shit he said. And I was like, no, we're calling you a capitalist because you think you building some bullshit stadium where people can go and make wages that don't even make them a living in New York City. Because I had a friend that literally told me, he was like, oh, well, Jay-Z does for the community. He built the Barclays Center there. I'm like, do they make a living wage there? I don't think so. They get treated like shit there. We just saw, I think it was Giannis, like he threw the ladder of a worker trying to fix the rim. Like, they get treated like shit there. I've talked to a couple of them. They get treated like shit. So it's like, I'm looking at it, from the perspective from that as well. Cause I'm, not unfortunately, but a lot of like Black culture now is centered around hip hop. And those are the messages that are getting pushed out. I think I mentioned this in your in one of your streams at one point. Like, it's like a lot of like rappers pushing this, like, yeah, we need the more capital we have. Kanye West is one of the guys that used to say this back in the day, America's for sale. Black people need to just build up our capital. He was saying money, but that's what I heard when he was saying it. Looking back now, we need to build more capital, then we could buy our way, to a seat at the table. And I'm like, bruh, you guys are the same people that will talk about Fred Hampton and talk about all of these revolutionary Black leaders, Malcolm X, all these people. Like, these guys were diametrically opposed to what you're saying. Malcolm X literally said, if you're a capitalist, you're a fucking vulture. Literally. That's literally what he said in his work. So, like, bouncing off of that, what you said just lines up with that perfectly. And that's kind of the things I've been trying to, teach to my friends, both white and Black, but especially Black, that we need to stop attacking, finding Black Americans, especially finding our salvation through capitalism, and find it through, socialism, communism, these principles that have always worked for us, especially around the world. You look at Gaddafi, you look at Thomas Sankara. Those are two of the African leaders I really revere the most. All of these, and looking to Latin America, Fidel Castro, who's always been an ally to the Black community. Even China, it's weird in the Black community, like, we don't know our history with China. Like, most people just think China is this racist country that doesn't like Black people because they were told by the media that one Black actor was taken off of a movie thing or something like that. So now most of the Black community just thinks, Chinese people are racist. They don't like black people. I'm like, do y'all like, have y'all not read what the Black Panthers had to say? These were guys that were carrying around Mao's Little Red Book at one point.
Yeah.
Like these people, Malcolm X was a huge supporter of Mao. Like all of these, like, historical tidbits that I've learned. Because I started my political journey out being more in line with, being basically almost a Trump supporter. And one of the things I used to be in line with was that I was very anti-China because of the things that I was told. But as I watched a lot of your streams, I did a lot of reading, just reading up. Like, it's very easy to debunk the mainstream narrative about China. It's very easy. Looking back at it now, it's very easy. It's like, you guys are literally like, for example, they talk about the social credit score in China. Like, the Foreign Policy Journal, I think that's what they're called. They literally put out multiple articles basically debunking the social credit score, basically saying, oh, China has these systems to do this, but you see on the title card, oh, so China's social credit score. But meanwhile, you actually read the full article, they're literally like debunking everything their headline says. So but I try to preach these, well, not preach, but talk to black people in America about these things, because I'm like, capitalism has never been our salvation. We've had our Black Wall Street, we've had black millionaires and billionaires in America. We've had all of these people that essentially bought their seat at the table. Booker T. Washington, who was a political rival of W.E.B. Du Bois, is a perfect example of that. You have a guy that basically in a sense was in the political structures of the United States at the time. I was reading this recently, and I forgot what president it was that passed away, but after that they just kicked him out of the White House. Bye, we don't want to affiliate with you. You're of no interest to us anymore. And that's where it's like, exploitation is exploitation, whether you have the most money or not. And that's something I've tried to preach to the black, or not, again, not preach, but educate the black community about, and about our real, what our leaders were really saying to us, back then. So it's very, I'm glad that you brought that up, and it really hits, it hits at home for me again, as I'm going through this, kind of figuring my way out within this, kind of new mentality I've adopted and came into honestly. But yeah, so that and one of the things I wanted to speak with you about as well was, so I will say, like, when I used to hear like a lot of your ideas, like patriotic socialism and things like that, like it kind of like not rubbed me the wrong way, but I was kind of like, oh, like, so we're supposed to like love America, like, and hearing the people online talk about it, obviously distorting what you were actually saying. It's not about, like, I'm assuming you're not saying turn into like a American exceptionalist per se,
No.
but you're saying you have to care about the action. You can't say you're for the working class and you hate about 45 to 50% of the working class. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately.
Well,
not unfortunately, but
yeah.
it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, and that, this is the country that we're in, and it is our responsibility, if we aspire to make it socialist, we aspire to lead the country, to put forward a political agenda that will make life better in the country. And obviously that would mean building it upon new foundations, and lifting up historically oppressed communities, but that doesn't mean that we go around just hating the country itself. We can talk about how it was founded in horrendous ways, with the slaughter of the Native Americans and with the transatlantic slave trade. And we can talk about the horrors of U.S. history, but we can also say that while all of those horrendous things were going on, there were people fighting back and resisting. And those people are just as much a history of the land and the soil that we're standing on as the awful people that were carrying out those horrendous things, right? I mean, and I don't think it's okay to hand over all the history of the United States to the Pentagon and to the war makers and to the forces that are supporting racism and such, right? That what about Frederick Douglass? What about Nat Turner? What about Eugene Debs? What about, the suffragists? What about the labor movement? And aren't they part of the history of this country? And if we're going to have socialism here, we shouldn't be figuring out how we can just condemn this place. We need to be figuring out how that good side of America can be mobilized to take power, because that's what socialism will be when it comes to America. It'll be all the good people who fought against all the evil things here. It'll be that strand and history and legacy of resistance becoming the ruling strata, becoming the ruling and dominant force in U.S. society, which I think very well could happen. There have been moments in U.S. history where we've seen good things come forward. I mean, the struggle to defeat slavery. I mean, if you talk about Harriet Tubman being the first woman to lead U.S. soldiers into battle, you talk about how there was like a whole communist division of the U.S. Army called the Ohio 9th Infantry Regiment that was formed. And, during the Second World War, Roosevelt, he built this coalition that included the labor unions and other progressive forces. The USA aligned with the Soviet Union to defeat the Nazis. And at the same time that they did that, they had Superman on the radio fighting the Ku Klux Klan. And they said that, the Ku Klux Klan are traitors. They're doing the same thing the Nazis do, spreading racial hatred. And Superman, he loved the Soviet Union. His name, Man of Steel, how you say Man of Steel in Russian? That's Stalin, right? And we had Stalin on the radio fighting the Ku Klux Klan and saying the Klan were just as bad as the Nazis. That was a progressive moment.
Comic book reader. I'm a huge comic book reader, and hearing you tell that story, you told it on a stream one time. I was like, yo, this is how I know the comic book industry is specifically out here to push the neoliberal bullshit, basically, because of all the diversity stuff they're pushing in comic books right now. You got Superman's son is gay. This person's trans. They literally have a Thor character where he's black, and he says like he basically talks in modern black vernacular. So instead of saying like Thor usually says, "Oh, by Odin's beard I decree thee bad," he literally says, "By Odin's fade I decree." And I'm like, really? So they put all of this diversity, like woke bullshit in there. And you guys don't highlight the fact that Superman used to fight the Ku Klux Klan. I wonder why that is. I wonder why that is.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, the Superman comic books at the time that they came out, they were very, very progressive. One of Superman's first acts was to rescue a group of striking miners from their crooked boss. And I always tell people, who is Lex Luthor, right? He's a maniacally evil bald guy who's using technology to conspire against the people. So Lex Luthor is basically
like the writers could see the future.
Yeah, he's Jeff Bezos. He's Jeff Bezos, basically. They predicted Jeff Bezos, the high-tech Silicon Valley fascists. So there you go. But yeah, I mean, I think that there are, if you look at the art and culture from the late 30s, when that popular front that was aligning with Roosevelt was coming together, psyching the U.S. public up for the eventual fight against fascism in the Second World War, there was a very progressive side to America. And if we just forget that, and if we just get into this mode of just condemning everything, then we cut ourselves off. Then we're not part of the conversation. You can't lead something that you're not part of. You can't become the dominant force in a country that you're not part of, right? And that is why things like patriotic socialism are done. And the fact that is so foreign to people indicates that a lot of these people, it's like, I don't even want to please them, because it's like they don't have serious aspirations to lead anything. They just want to kind of be on the internet and feel good about themselves. And so it's like, people say, well, don't do that. People are going to condemn you for it. It's like, who's going to condemn me? People that have no aspiration to lead anything or run the country.
A lot of those people are like Gen Zers, though, because even if you disagree with somebody, I grew up in the millennial era where computers were first blowing up. So I grew up on like Illuminati conspiracy theories and everything, and 9/11 truthers and things like those were the things I was reading as a teenager, because that was what was all over YouTube before YouTube became CensorTube. So that was what was all over YouTube. So it's like people don't even you get a lot of these new Gen Zers that can't even think outside of the box. So even even though you might disagree, see where the perspective that person is coming from. And that kind of goes into, I feel like, how they're dumbing down society. Like people aren't even thinking. So I would say, don't even try, I know you don't, but don't try to plead, because they're not even thinking. They're just reacting emotionally on top of that.
Yeah, well, did you see the Saturday Night Live sketch that came out just after Donald Trump won the election, where Tom Hanks played like a Trump-supporting white guy on Black Jeopardy? Did you ever see that sketch?
Yes, I remember that, yeah.
And it pointed out that there was a lot of overlap, because I remember the good old days before the U.S. economy collapsed, like the 90s or whatever. And, in the white community, no one was talking about the Illuminati. No one was talking about conspiracy theories, but things started changing, especially after the financial crisis. And, in the black community, there's been talk about the Illuminati, quite a lot, and talk about conspiracies and all of that. And there was a real shift in the last decade or so to, now, among white people, there is a lot of feeling that the government is run by some kind of conspiracy. There's a feeling that the wars are no good and they're being waged on behalf of some kind of shadowy elite. And these kind of feelings are very widespread among white workers now. And I think it's a result of conditions becoming worse. And that, that white middle class, that labor aristocracy that kind of held America together, and enabled them to carry out the horrendous things they did, that white middle class has been gotten rid of. And so again, rather than simply seeing this as an opportunity to say, I told you so, I think this is an opportunity to say, now we can have solidarity, right? And that wouldn't it be great if low-income white workers who believe in the Illuminati and black workers who believe in the Illuminati fought together against the big banks and corporations? I would rather see that than see people pointing fingers at each other. Obviously there needs to be recognition of the fact that certain communities have been oppressed for a long time. And I don't like what Tulsi Gabbard, some of what she says, I really don't like. I mean, when she talks about quote unquote anti-white racism, there's no such thing as anti-white racism. Racism is systemic. Racism is a history. It's not an attitude. So when she talks about anti-white racism, she's just wrong. She doesn't know what she's talking about. And she's pandering to people that see things in a not so good way. And so obviously,
and even now, it's like I'm sorry to cut you off, but
no, go ahead, please.
Yeah, but even now, it's like I'm hearing a lot of what she's saying, and she's literally contradicting herself from what she was saying in the past. Like I feel like one that people aren't pointing out is the fact that, like, what did Tulsi become very popular for in 2020? Taking down Kamala Harris in the debates. Well, people seem to forget what that topic was about. Cash bail. But now all of a sudden, Tulsi Gabbard used to be a huge proponent of getting rid of cash bail, and you're seeing, some movements in that direction, and you're seeing a pushback on it as well. I've been reading into that, cash bail more so a lot. And like, if you actually see the conditions of a lot of these like jails, not prisons, jails where people are literally held without trial, it's like literally what they try to tell you is happening to the Uyghurs is what these prisons are like, or what these jails are like. And it's very ironic how that happens. But so when you try, like, Tulsi used to speak on it, that was one of the things that attracted me towards her, was that in tandem with her anti-imperialism as well. And it's like, now to hear her just like pretend like she was never talking about those things, and now she's completely against cash bail, it's like, what the hell? Like,
well, I mean,
like, I donated money to you. Like,
yeah, well, I mean, it seems like she's realizing what all of us are kind of painfully realizing, which is that unfortunately the left has lost its mind and become so infiltrated and dominated by the government and by intelligence agencies that the opposition to the status quo is coming from the right now. They're way more afraid of the right and of the Trump people than they are of any socialist and communist groups.
I try telling that to leftists all the time, and they do not want to hear this. I'm like, bro, like, if you hear some of this shit, like when I'm telling, like I said, I work with these people. I work with Trump supporters. I work with, like, I literally used to, the guy that trained me at a job how to drive a forklift. Every day we will walk out. He has a truck, MAGA this, the Trump slogans, the where one goes out, whatever, the WW1 thing, splattered with Trump stuff. Wow. And like just having conversations with this guy and talking to him, you'll hear like, this guy's not a racist. This guy's not none of these things. He sees his standard of living is getting demolished, and he saw, like, he even told he was a fucking Obama voter previously. So it's like when you like, instead of just trying to like judge people, and well, not even judge, but you react from your feelings when you see somebody wearing a Trump hat or whatever, or they're saying things that you view online with MAGA. It's like, well, try to understand where these people are coming from, because a lot of these people are saying the same shit you've been saying, just in a different way. And you can find some common ground there, as opposed to like trying to team up with fucking liberals who are diametrically opposed to everything that leftists are supposed to be against, but somehow you find your way there. Like, I never understood that, especially when I became politically aware. Like, I became politically aware in 2016 because of the Trump election and things like that. But it's like my like grandparents and everything, like, they voted Democrat, as a lot of black people did and still do. But they always used to criticize like Clinton. Like, the only politician my mom, grandparent, well, my mom actually didn't like Obama. She told me that. She said, I didn't trust him. I voted for him because I didn't like I think it was John McCain at the time. But like, very distrustful of presidents in general until Obama came along, and that's kind of what got me into Jimmy Dore a lot. Jimmy Dore is a big, influencer of mine, and
Oh,
my
he's great.
style as well. Yeah, I'm kind of timid here, but if you watch any of my streams, I'm very like abrasive, energetic, and things like that. But one of the things he put me onto was Obama. Learning about Obama, I'm like, holy fuck, this guy is just insane. Cynthia McKinney as well. Talks about how like Obama was basically the black face of Wall Street as Cornel West. Even somebody like Cornel West, who puts it in a nice way, is understanding what Obama was. So it's like,
absolutely,
and I feel like a lot of black people are getting hip to that now, are getting hip to Obama. Like, he seems to only come around to crush any type of movements when the multi-millionaire NBA players finally decide to do something worth a damn, like going on strike because of what they feel is grievances. Here comes Obama. Oh no, don't do that. Keep playing. Dude, go away. Just go away.
Well, listen, it's been fun. I really do appreciate an opportunity to come on. This has been a great conversation. And you're welcome to come on my stream. I'd be happy to have you on sometime. Would you come on my channel sometime?
I would love to, Caleb. I would love to. Yes.
All right. Well, we'll bring you on. Maybe next week I'll have you come on and have you talk to the viewers, and I'll ask you some questions. That sound good?
Yeah, sounds good. Absolutely.
Very good. Excellent. Well, this has been great. I'm getting ready for a stream in about 40 minutes. So I'm gonna go get some water and figure out what I'm gonna say on my stream. But I really appreciate having you on, and we'll have you on next week. You'll come on my channel next week. Sound good?
Yes, it does, Caleb. Thank you for coming on again. It's been a pleasure having you on. I feel like your knowledge is invaluable. It's invaluable.
Thank you. Well, I really enjoyed being here, and I learned a lot from what you had to say. It was very interesting, and it's been fun. So we will be in touch. Thank you very much, and best wishes for now. Thanks.
All right, Caleb. Take it easy.
Yep.
All right, guys. So that was a stream with Caleb. Very, very fun stream, man. Like I said, I've been following Caleb's work for a while now, so it was definitely dope having him on. More guests to come. I'm working on getting more guests for the Tox Talk podcast. That's the American Autopsy podcast. So if you go on I should have some episodes on Spotify right now, but I got to work on putting the backlog up on there and everything. But we'll get it done. Just wait for it. But I'm gonna try and get this episode out there by this weekend. So you should be able to get this on Spotify soon. Spotify and wherever you listen to podcasts. So but yeah, guys, thank you for tuning in. As always, like, subscribe, and share. Emphasis on all that. Go over to Caleb's channel, like, subscribe, and share, and all that. Hopefully we'll work it out. I'll be on there soon, guys, because like I said, I love conversating with Caleb. I love hearing his insight, and it was fun. So go over to his channel, like, subscribe as well. He has a stream going on tonight. I actually will not be able to watch it because I have work in the morning. I have to go to work tomorrow, unfortunately, but only one day because I have the weekend off plus Thanksgiving. So I have a long weekend. So I might do a couple streams. Who knows? We'll see. But yeah, guys. So like, subscribe on my channel again. Yes, I am on Twitter, American Autopsy. At American Autopsy. I think that's what it is. Let me check. I always forget my Twitter handle. I just be talking shit on Twitter. I'm not gonna lie. I'm so focused on talking shit on Twitter. But yeah, American Autopsy. Yeah, at American Autopsy. Yep. I'm on Instagram as well. Same thing. My personal Twitter is at Air to Wakanda. That's my personal Twitter. I talk about everything on there. I talk about music, all that. So you're going to see a lot of different things on there. Also, guys, if you could head over to the Patreon, there is exclusive content there. There's actually, speaking of hip hop, Caleb, we talked about hip hop on here as well, a little bit in reference to Jay-Z, but if you guys know Frank Analysis, me and him talked a little hip hop, our favorite artists and things like that. That video is up on my Patreon. Go check it out. I'm going to be having some written work coming up. Actually, I have an article about Obama that I've been working on for a while. I think it's almost done. I'm going to be ready to post it soon. So head over there to check that out. If you can, it would be greatly appreciated if you could leave a donation there to keep the channel going. Helps keeps us afloat. I also have CashApp, I think Venmo. Everything's down below if you would like to leave a contribution to the channel. Helps keep it afloat and all that. But yeah, guys, as always, it's a pleasure here to share knowledge with you. Go back and watch my old work. If you're new to the channel, I saw a lot of people that I've never seen before. So definitely uh go check out my past work as well. I try to do streams frequently. My job now that I have now is kind of demanding, so I don't get to stream as much as I like. But hey, man, I try to get it in where I can get it in, bro. Because I love talking about these these ideas that are honestly affecting Americans and where America is at now. But even more so, like I told Caleb, I've been delving more into like Pan-Africanism, even like the ADOS movement as well. Even though there's points of contention and disagreements that I have with them, um, in terms of certain things, but the emotion and how, well, not emotion, but how the mind state where Black Americans are right now is something that I can definitely relate to. I hear it from my friends, I hear it from family members, from all different backgrounds and things like that. So it's very it's a very nuanced times that we live in. So it's good to have these conversations, so and talk. So, but yeah, guys, I'm gonna go ahead and hop off now. I'm gonna end the stream here. Thank you everybody for tuning in. I might do a stream tomorrow because I'm off the next. I work tomorrow morning, but I'm off the rest of the week and Sunday as well, and through the weekend. So might do a stream tomorrow. I don't know what, like a stream with just me. I know me and Matt are talking about my not co-host, but he's a friend of the show, comes on. We have a stream that we do together called the Sidetrack stream. Um we may do a stream together soon. I don't know yet. We'll figure that out. But you know what? Tomorrow's Wednesday. I'm gonna do a stream tomorrow. Those are usually my post days and stream days anyway. So I'm gonna do a stream tomorrow because I was supposed to do one Monday and I didn't do it because I knew I was doing this today. So I'm gonna do a stream tomorrow. So look out for the thumbnail and all that for the post on Twitter and everything. I'm gonna try and get that out before I go to bed tonight. So definitely tune in, guys. Lock in. Like I said, again, if you can't leave a contribution for the show, all that information is down below. I'm on Patreon, Cash App, like I said, I think Venmo. So leaving a contribution, is greatly appreciated. I gotta plug the show, guys. That's just how it goes sometimes. But guys, thank you for tuning in. All the new people, subscribe. Come fuck with your boy, can rock with your boy. And yeah, thanks for tuning in. Peace. Be easy.